On that day, when evening had come, he said to them, "Let us go across to the other side." And leaving the crowd behind, they took him with them in the boat, just as he was. Other boats were with him. A great windstorm arose, and the waves beat into the boat, so that the boat was already being swamped. But he was in the stern, asleep on the cushion. And they woke him up and said to him, "Teacher, do you not care that we are perishing?" He woke up and rebuked the wind and said to the sea, "Peace, be still." Then the wind ceased, and there was a dead calm. He said to them, "Why are you afraid? Have you still no faith?" And they were filled with great awe and said to one another, "Who then is this, that even the wind and the sea obey him?"
Hello everyone, how are we doing tonight? Excellent, good to see your smiling faces. I'm Denise, in case you don't know me, and I'm going to be at supper having a cup of tea, so please come introduce yourself if you're new or, I don't know, have some questions for me or something. I could even pray for you if you'd like me to do that. So, about 10 years ago, I joined a rowing club. My friend Jenny and I'd never actually rowed before, but 50 is never too late to start a new sport, right? So my friend Jenny and I, we would drive out to Lake Kawongbar every Saturday morning. We were on the water in a double scull by 5:30 a.m. Rowing is great because you get home and nobody else is even out of bed. It's like the day hasn't even started. I was younger then, but not by that much. So we weren't particularly competitive, but we enjoyed the few Ks up and down the lake. One morning we did something very foolish. We decided to go to a more deserted part of the lake and just have a bit of an explore around the lake. But sculls aren't really designed for exploring. If you want to explore a lake, you do that by kayak, not in a scull with like giant oars sticking out the sides. Sculls are really, really unstable and they capsize very easily. We got our oars tangled in the weeds, and the next thing we knew, water was rushing into our scull and we were slowly tipping over. My friend Jenny told me later that as we went down, I apparently called out, I have no recollection of this, but I apparently called out, "It's okay, don't worry, everything's going to be okay." I'm pretty sure it was my automatic mother instinct kicking in, because that's what you say to your kids. Jenny remembers thinking, "She's delusional. It's not all right. We're capsizing." And she was correct. We capsized. It was not all right. We were in deep, freezing water. It was just muddy, like the mud was like 2 feet deep. We couldn't stand up. We didn't have any life jackets because you don't have life jackets in a scull. We had this waterlogged boat that was upside down, oars were floating away, and we were in a deserted part of the lake where nobody rowed. Well, it took us about an hour to right the boat, to haul ourselves back into it, that can't have been pretty, and bail enough water out with our hands for it to be rowable. I actually have no idea how we managed that. But, desperation does things to people. It took another hour or so to row our heavy, still waterlogged boat back to the main rowing course. We were exhausted. By that time, 2 club members had actually come out looking for us in a tinny, which is also very embarrassing. We never went exploring the lake again. Now, if we'd had Jesus in the boat with us, everything would have been all right. We would have just woken him up and he would have stopped our boat from capsizing and stopped the water from rushing in. It's a great Sunday school story, isn't it? It's got such a happy ending. And the moral of the story is, don't be afraid. Of course Jesus cares. Have faith. Jesus is in your boat and he will protect you from perishing in storms. And I think it is both simultaneously as simple as that and also a lot more complicated than that. There are three ways of asking a question in Greek, and it's kind of equivalent to our three English ways. Let's see if this works, Jono. Ah, it does. Well done. Jono helped me with the PowerPoint today. So the first way is because this is what the disciples said to Jesus. Do you care that we are perishing? See, if you ask the question that way, you don't really know the answer, do you? It could be yes or it could be no. But you could also ask, you don't care that we're perishing, do you? You see, I'm still asking a question, but I'm pretty sure the answer is no, just by the way I've phrased the question. The other way that you can ask the question, you do care that we're perishing, don't you? It's still a question, but now I'm sure that the answer must be yes. And I'm just kind of looking for reassurance that I'm right. Do you see the different ways of asking the question? So you can do that in Greek. The question that the disciples are asking as they stand terrified in this boat that is already swamped by the waves is that third question. You do care, don't you? They're pretty sure that Jesus cares, but it doesn't really seem like it. They're desperate for reassurance. He's asleep. It's an important question for the disciples, obviously, because it looks like they're about to drown. But what isn't so obvious when we're just reading this Bible passage is that it's also an important question for the very first hearers of Mark's story. We often don't think about that sort of things, do we? There's kind of multiple horizons for any story. There's the time of the events in the story, and in this case, the time was when Jesus was in that boat with his disciples. I don't know, somewhere around 30 CE or something. That's the first time horizon. But there's another time horizon, the time when Mark wrote this story. Somewhere around, probably, somewhere between like 65 and 75 CE, like 35, 40 years later. What was happening in the time when Mark collected all these stories about Jesus and put them together in such a way that they tell one big story? Well, in Galilee and Judea, where this story is set, the Roman army were putting down a Jewish revolt. And this became this 5-year-long and bloody war that devastated the whole region. About 60,000 soldiers moved down from the north of Galilee through the countryside, subjugating or demolishing villages in their path until they finally arrived at Jerusalem. Jerusalem was full of pilgrims who had come to celebrate Passover. Historians of the time, and you're never quite sure whether they're like strictly accurate or not, but historians of the time estimate that 600,000 people became trapped in Jerusalem as the soldiers surrounded the city. The city walls of Jerusalem were so impenetrable that they couldn't be breached. And so the army set up camp and waited for the city to starve. They crucified anyone caught fleeing from the city. And some historians tell us that thousands were crucified. Their bodies were left to rot where those on the inside of the city could see. Added to all this trauma, the population inside Jerusalem was actually divided. There were those who were loyal to the elite leaders of Jerusalem who wanted to negotiate terms of peace, and there were those who wanted to fight to the death. And then there were hundreds of thousands of people just caught in between. Violence, the stench of death, and no safe harbour anywhere. After a 7-month siege, the walls were finally breached and the army demolished Jerusalem, slaughtered those who were living there, looted all the sacred objects out of the temple, and then tore down the temple so that not one stone was left upon another. You might recognise that phrase when you read through Mark. So that was happening, Galilee and Judea. Meanwhile, in Rome, a little way away, around the same time, in 64 CE, a disastrous fire destroyed much of the inner city of Rome, and the political leadership of Rome needed a scapegoat to deflect the blame for the fire. And guess who got picked? It was the Christians. They were kind of easy picking. There wasn't too many of them. They were a bit of a minority group. And many were rounded up, tortured, and put to death in just the most horrific of ways. Nero, the emperor at the time, probably insane, ordered some people to be rolled in tar and lit as light for his gardens. He, in fact, killed himself a few years later, 68. And there was a political struggle for the throne. Now we've got, in 1 year, 3 different emperors get crowned. To say that it was a tumultuous time is an understatement. This is almost certainly the period of time when Nero was in power, when Peter and also Paul were crucified. The same Peter who shared a boat with Jesus, who found himself in this violent storm with his boat swamped and in danger of sinking, who called out in fear, "You do care that we're perishing, don't you?" And I'm trying to imagine this part of Mark's gospel being read aloud to Mark's first audience, because Peter's crucifixion would have been a very fresh memory in their minds, happening not that many years before. And not just Peter, but other Christian leaders. And indeed, even some of those first hearers had seen terrible, terrible things and may have been living in constant danger. And in the midst of all of this turmoil, the community is trying to figure out, how do we understand our faith? And not in some academic, intellectual way, sitting around at a theology conference having cups of tea. Their very existence is at stake as Christians. What could they count on? What did this war and all this political turmoil mean? Did it mean that the resurrected Jesus was going to come back immediately and appear and wrap up world events? Because he kind of seemed to allude to that in some of the teaching that Mark gives us in his gospel. Or did those stories about Jesus' miraculous power, like this one in the boat, did that mean that they could count on that same kind of miraculous help when they found themselves drowning, or when they found themselves about to be crucified? What did it mean that Superman King Jesus had not defeated the Romans, but had been crucified by them? And what did it mean to follow the suffering Jesus? See, Mark's community was in the middle of this dangerous storm, this great windstorm. The waves are breaking into the boat. The boat is swamped. It's about to sink. The occupants are about to perish. And so far, Jesus has not shown up to calm the storm, to still the wind and the waves. They must have wondered, are we crazy to have gotten into this boat in the first place? Maybe we should have stayed safe on the shore like the crowds. And at some point in this chaotic time, Mark has the audacity to write his good news about Jesus, Christ King, Son of God. A story about the Messiah King, who demonstrates that he has the power to be Superman Jesus, who can calm the storms and still the waves, but it's also a story about a Messiah King who chooses to walk the path of suffering and to give his life a ransom for many. Mark's story, it really calls for faith, for his readers to just keep holding on while the storm rages around and the boat is swamped. But it's not a faith that Superman Jesus will come and save them with his miraculous power and stop the wind and calm the waves. This is faith by your fingernails. This is gripping onto the end of your rope and not knowing what will happen when your strength finally gives way. It's faith when all around is chaos. Mark's story doesn't promise his readers, "It's okay, don't worry, everything will be all right," like a mother soothing her children with false optimism as the boat starts to sink. It gives no trite or easy answers that soothe and comfort. It doesn't pretend that the danger is really not that bad. And so, there's a third time horizon, and that's us sitting here thinking about that story and thinking about Mark's community as well, and thinking about you and where you're at. If you're in the midst of a storm and it feels like you are about to perish, then can I say Mark's gospel is the one for you. If you've put yourself in the boat with Jesus and it seems like he's oblivious to your situation, sleeping unconcerned with his head on a cushion, did you notice that? While you're battling the oars and trying to stay afloat, then Mark is the gospel for you. If the waves are already sweeping into your boat and it's already swamped, don't read Matthew's gospel. Don't read Luke's or John's gospel. Stick with Mark. Because Mark doesn't offer false hope. Mark won't give you trite answers. Mark doesn't promise that Jesus is going to rush into your situation and wave a magic wand and fix everything. But the Jesus that you find in Mark's gospel will be your companion on the road through suffering. Because this Jesus has walked the path of suffering too and knows it well. This is a Jesus who offers hope. Not close your eyes and make a wish sort of hope. A hope that's much more certain, even while it's kind of elusive. Hope that it's possible to walk through suffering and come out the other side. It offers a glimpse, a tiny little glimpse of life beyond suffering. The empty tomb, remember those last 8 verses? Just this whiff of resurrection. No conversations with the resurrected Jesus, but there's a hint there, a whiff, a mysterious promise that if the tomb is empty, then Jesus is out there somewhere. And remember, going ahead of you. And so, it is okay. Don't worry. Everything is going to be all right.